Imagine being told that humanity's most devastating 20th century catastrophe, a worldwide inferno that devoured countless souls, simultaneously hosted the planet's largest, unacknowledged, and ruthlessly systematic selection process. One governed not by military commanders, but by the quiet, urgent decisions of women. And that in mere moments, ULL discover how classified wartime records, an intimate correspondence from the Second World War, reveal a primal force so commanding, so merciless in its operation, that it transforms your entire understanding of romance, devotion, and the authentic essence of feminine attraction. The calendar reads 1942. Civilization burns. For countless young soldiers from America, Britain, and Canada, existence has been violently reduced to stark simplicity. Endure or perish. Dream of sanctuary. They huddle in ice-bound trenches across the Ardennes, vapor rising from their lips, digits frozen on weaponry. They watch vast Pacific horizons, listening intently for aircraft engines that signal potential annihilation. Their universe consists of soil, steel, and relentless crushing dread, yet within their consciousness, they clutch a lifeline, a mental refuge from the tempest. They preserve her memory, the beloved waiting at home, her image in a worn photograph pressed against their chest, her fragrance lingering on correspondence, a fragile whisper of a reality now impossibly remote. She represents his purpose. She embodies what justifies his struggle. He pictures her operating machinery in a munitions plant, hair-bound back, contributing her efforts. He envisions her composing letters, devoted, patient, her affection, a fixed beacon in his darkened existence. This tale of the loyal sweetheart maintaining the home base forms the foundation of wartime romantic legend. It's a narrative we construct to render sacrifice meaningful, to soften horror's edge beyond metal and mortality. Yet history, when scrutinized without emotion, presents an alternative narrative, a more troubling account. It unveils that for a remarkable number of women, life's greatest romantic prospect emerged not amid peacetime serenity at social gatherings, but riding the thunderous, cataclysmic surge of absolute warfare. To grasp this occurrence, we must initially establish our terminology not with contemporary political weight, but with precise biological clarity. Hypergamy, from ancient Greek hyperbeyond and gamos, union. It represents the instinctive impulse to establish partnership with someone of equivalent or significantly elevated standing. This isn't moral weakness. It's not cultural conditioning. It's an evolutionary mandate encoded across millennia to guarantee offspring survival and advancement. In stable, organized societies, this impulse functions within specific limitations: economic bracket, geographical nearness, family obligations. It's a gradual, persistent undercurrent. It introduced that identical imperative into the furnace of worldwide catastrophe. An atmosphere where conventional social frameworks have disintegrated, where mortality visits constantly, and where an enormous concentrated population of elevated status males suddenly materializes.
There.
And that gradual undercurrent transforms into a tsunami. The Second World War didn't invent feminine hypergamy. It merely eliminated all constraints, accelerated it exponentially, and provided complete opportunity. The domestic sphere wasn't a realm of patient anticipation. For numerous women, it became a frenzied, urgent, and ultimately calculating arena. Examine the circumstances. With massive male deployment, women flooded the workforce unprecedentedly. They secured independent income, achieved remarkable autonomy, and encountered social emancipation that would have seemed impossible 10 years earlier. Yet this revolutionary independence existed amid absent male companionship. The familiar dating environment, the agricultural workers, the banking clerks, the repair shop mechanics had vanished, deployed overseas, substituted by a tangible, painful void. This generated profound unease, a terror of obsolescence, of squandering opportunity during optimal reproductive windows. Now superimpose upon this anxiety the entrance of different men. Not the familiar local boys from childhood, but outsiders, warriors, aviators, elite fighters. These men weren't characterized by their civilian social positions. Warfare had eliminated that. They were characterized by their military attire, by their apparent valor, by the raw, deadly capability they embodied. A Texan sergeant who'd been agricultural labor in 1941 now commanded a lure, standing in concrete authority exceeding any local man who remained. He supplied stockings, confections, rare luxury items. Beyond that, he supplied survival psychologically. Connecting with him represented wagering on tomorrow, on the prevailing force. He embodied escape from provincial existence, opportunity for life more thrilling and protected than anything familiar. This constituted the ideal hypergamic convergence. The evidence is stark, unforgiving, and undeniable. Let's progress beyond hypothesis into historical records. The verification exists in documented trails. Historian Doris Campbell, in her groundbreaking study, Women at War with America, analyzed the stunning figures. Throughout the United States, marriage statistics surged during wartime vastly, surpassing pre-war estimates. Yet this wasn't evenly distributed. Marriage rates between women and departing servicemen skyrocketed. It reflected panic-driven urgency to establish commitment before departure's uncertainty. But the most revealing evidence emerges from post-war developments with so-called war brides. The American government enacted the War Brides Act of 1945 and subsequently the Foreign Fiancé Act to enable immigration of servicemen as spouses and betrothed. The figures are astonishing. Exceeding 100,000 women from Britain alone immigrated as war brides joining their American spouses. Tens of thousands additional came from Australia, New Zealand, and throughout liberated Europe, Italy, France, Germany. This wasn't a gradual flow. It was wholesale female migration, a literal global-scale vote with their movement, selecting the American conqueror over their own countrymen. The British administration, disturbed by this extensive female departure, commissioned internal investigations, concerned about losing its young female population to prosperous, attractive Americans. Their own records display profound concern regarding economic and social authority disparity. The GIs were viewed as superior providers, their homeland untouched by war's devastation, offering abundance compared to rationed Britain. This represented hypergamy on civilizational magnitude. Now, let's descend from statistical overview to individual experience. Let's encounter the humans behind these numbers. Here the narrative becomes heart-rendingly personal, and where harsh reality emerges into sharp, agonizing clarity. The National Archives contain gut-wrenching correspondence from soldiers who came home discovering their reality demolished, not by explosives, but by faithlessness. These aren't sterile historical artifacts. They're anguished cries preserved in ink, suspended in time. Take the situation of Private James Miller from Ohio. His letters to his hometown sweetheart Mary chronicle unwavering dedication. He transmits his earnings home to her, discusses the modest house they'll construct. He sketches the front porch swing in letter margins. He endures the nightmare of the bulge offensive. His body intact, but his psyche wounded. He bears her photograph damaged and fading through everything. He receives discharge in 1945, a champion in the public's perception. He makes the extended train journey homeward, his pulse racing with hope that sustained him 3 years. He reaches her residence, bouquet in hand. She answers the door. She's not solitary. A man wearing an Army Air Corps officer's uniform stands behind her, his hand proprietarily on her shoulder. She regards James not with happiness, but with sympathy and discomfort. She presents the man. He's a bomber aviator she encountered at a USO event in Cleveland previously. They wed last month. James' complete reality, the mental framework that enabled him to withstand unspeakable nightmare, dissolves in that singular instant. The government he defended considers him heroic. The woman he defended considers him obsolete. His position as mere infantry enlisted was superseded by the superior position of an officer, an aviator, a flyboy. His psychological wounds, his sacrifice signified nothing in the revised hypergamic equation. His experience was duplicated with slight variations, hundreds of thousands of occasions. Or consider the even more jarring occurrence of the Dear John correspondence. This wasn't merely relationship termination, it was a particular savage communication form. Severance notice delivered to a man in combat territory. Picture the scenario. A mail distribution at a forward installation on some godforsaken Pacific atoll. Men gather around. The singular, joyful moment in a week of horror. A lieutenant distributes the precious envelopes. One soldier, we'll call him Corporal Evans, receives his letter. He identifies the penmanship of his fiancée. He opens it hastily, a smile on his dirt-covered face. He begins reading. The smile disappears. Color evacuates from his features. The letter isn't filled with devotion and yearning. It's a detached clinical document. It explains she's encountered someone different, someone stationed domestically, someone whose future isn't threatened. She regrets it, but she must be pragmatic. She wishes he comprehends. She wishes he returns safely. The paper drops from his grasp. The men surrounding him become silent. They understand. They've witnessed it previously. The military leadership acknowledged the catastrophic impact these letters had on morale and combat performance. Some units even had officers who would examine mail beforehand and withhold the Dear John letters until following a mission. Fearing a despondent soldier would become reckless, a hazard to himself and his comrades. The war apparatus was literally being undermined by the unwavering operation of feminine hypergamy. The requirements of the heart were superseding the requirements of the state. This conduct was logical. From a purely evolutionary perspective, it was ingenious. The woman who connected with the highest status male, accessible, the one with the optimal apparent survival and provision probability was executing the ideal choice for her genetic inheritance. The aviator, the officer, the technician with secure assignment. These were the rewards. The infantryman in the trenches, the sailor on a destroyer in submarine-threatened waters, these were poor wagers. Their mortality rates were terrifyingly elevated. To anticipate them was to gamble everything. The catastrophe functioned as a screen, compelling women to make ruthlessly effective decisions. This is the fundamental harsh truth. Sentimentality and historical attachment are indulgences that cannot survive authentic crisis. Loyalty is provisional. Love is dependent. It depends on a man's capacity to sustain and display status and protection in the present moment, even particularly when civilization is disintegrating. The soldier who departed as a high school boyfriend returned discovering the standards had transformed. He might have been valiant, but was he a provider? Did he possess opportunities? Or was he damaged, traumatized, competing against men who'd acquired status and resources during warfare, not merely risked their existence? The battlefield didn't conclude in Europe or the Pacific. It persisted on the domestic front, a silent social battlefield, where the instruments were charisma, status, and the commitment of security and the victims, were the spirits of the men who had already sacrificed everything. This is not an accusation against women. It's an accusation against a mythical narrative that's been marketed to men for generations. The tale of the faithful Penelope weaving her tapestry while anticipating decades for Odysseus to return from warfare is mythology. It's a story men construct to make the intrinsic risk of commitment appear secure. World War II exposes this mythology in the most brutal possible illumination. It reveals to us the raw, unfiltered mechanism of human mating approaches. For the contemporary man, this isn't grounds for hopelessness. It's grounds for enlightenment. It's the ultimate awakening. It's comprehending that this impulse exists, that it's fundamental and commanding, is the initial step toward successfully navigating it. It signifies understanding that your worth is not inherent. It's constructed, sustained, and proven. It signifies recognizing that in peaceful times, the operation of hypergamy is slower, more nuanced, but equally genuine. The man who believes love is unconditional is a man existing on borrowed duration. A man who will be ambushed when a personal catastrophe, a career loss, an ailment, a depression temporarily reduces his status and exposes the authentic nature of the connections he thought were indestructible. The teachings of the war brides aren't limited to history volumes. They're manifesting in every dating platform, in every divorce proceeding. In every relationship where a man believes his previous actions are sufficient to ensure future devotion, we have witnessed the preparation, the ideal convergence. We have witnessed the stark, harsh evidence of mass female exodus. We have experienced the visceral, soul-crushing agony of the individual soldiers betrayed by the very system they were perishing to defend. But this is merely the commencement. This is merely the general framework of the occurrence. Because to genuinely comprehend the profundity of this, we must travel to the crisis's epicenter itself. We must go to the vanquished territories, to the devastated metropolises of Germany and Japan. For it is there, in the absolute debris of defeat, where all social hierarchy had disintegrated,
Where survival was a moment-to-moment battle.
that feminine hypergamy exhibited its most merciless, most startling, and most strategically masterful manifestation. The narrative of the War Bride isn't exclusively about British women selecting American GIs over British soldiers. It's about what transpired when the combat ceased, the haze dissipated, and the conquerors stood amid the wreckage. And the women of the defeated territories regarded them not with hostility, but with possibility. In the subsequent chapter, we traverse a boundary that few historians have ventured to examine. We will investigate the darkest, most taboo dimension of this entire occurrence. What did hypergamy resemble when the alternative was starvation? What transpires when the enemy soldier, the man who demolished your city and eliminated your siblings, becomes the most valuable provider on the planet? We will discover the narratives of the German Fergulins and the Japanese Pan-Pan girls who established relationships with their former adversaries. Not from affection, but from a calculated, brutal necessity for survival. We will scrutinize the children produced from these unions and the societal wounds they left behind. This is where the philosophical harsh truth becomes unavoidable. This is where we learn that in the authentic calculus of survival, there is no space for animosity, only strategy. The journey into the core of darkness proceeds. The quietness that descended over Europe and the Pacific in 1945 was not the quietness of tranquility. It was the quietness of the tomb, of depletion, of complete devastation. For the conquerors, it was a period of exhausted victory, of gradual demobilization, and the extended journey home. But for the defeated, it was the commencement of a fresh, and in numerous respects, more frightening conflict. The conflict for survival in a reality that had been methodically demolished. Cities were diminished to irregular outlines against the horizon, landscapes of debris where the odor of death and decomposition persisted for years. There was no sustenance, there was no heating, there was no order. The social agreement, that delicate arrangement that maintained civilization together, had been shredded. In this absolute nadir of human existence, where every facade of ethics and culture had been removed, only the most fundamental instincts persisted. And it is there in the absolute core of darkness that we witness the ultimate, most merciless, and most philosophically crushing expression of feminine hypergamy. This is not the narrative of selecting a handsome American aviator over a local boy. This is the narrative of what occurs when the choice is between connecting with the man who incinerated your city or observing your child perish from starvation in your embrace. To understand the landscape, one must initially grasp the totality of the defeat. In Germany, the concept of stunned null zero hour emerged. It was the recognition that the clock had been restarted, that everything preceding was meaningless, and that life would now be calculated in calories, cigarettes, and fragments of coal. The occupying armies, American, British, French, and Soviet, were not merely soldiers, they were deities. They dominated everything. They possessed the only functional currency: food, pharmaceuticals, chocolate, nylon stockings, and the absolute power of existence and termination. A single American GI providing a tin of sea rations to a German child was a more powerful symbol of authority than any armored vehicle. In Japan, the devastation was even more absolute. The atomic weapons had obliterated 2 cities, but the traditional firebombing had consumed dozens more. The divine emperor, a living deity for centuries, had been compelled to renounce his divinity. The Japanese populace were not just defeated, they were spiritually annihilated, adrift in a cosmos that had fundamentally and violently fractured. Into this psychological and physical void stepped the American occupier, the gaijin, the outsider, who now possessed the keys to existence itself. It is within this framework that the most shocking and strategically masterful hypergamous maneuvers occurred. The women of the defeated territories, particularly Germany and Japan, confronted a calculation so brutal it makes the Dear John letters seem sentimental. Their men were absent, deceased, maimed, or deteriorating in POW camps, returning broken and emasculated, often unable to even articulate their trauma. Their status diminished to less than 0 by the sheer fact of their defeat. To be a German man in 1945 was to be an outcast, a symbol of failure and monstrous ideology. To be a Japanese man was to be the embodiment of a failed divine mandate. They could not provide, they could not protect. They offered only a shared starvation and a legacy of disgrace. And then there were the conquerors, the Americans. They were healthy, well-nourished, confident, and possessed of a seemingly infinite abundance. They represented the ultimate evolutionary reward, survival itself. Connecting with them was not a matter of social advancement. It was a matter of biological necessity. This was hypergamy, stripped of all romance, all facade, all decoration. It was a raw evolutionary transaction. The designation for these relationships has been sanitized by history, fraternization. But this clinical term conceals a universe of desperation, calculation, and survival. The Allied leadership initially strictly prohibited fraternization with the German population. It was viewed as a security hazard and a moral transgression. But the directive was completely unenforceable. It was like prohibiting the tide from rising. The attraction was not merely romantic, it was gravitational. The American GI, often isolated and far from home, sought companionship. The German Fräulein sought salvation. A famous haunting photograph from the period captures this dynamic perfectly. A beautiful young German woman, her hair perfectly styled, walking through the rubble of her city. She is smiling, laughing, arm in arm, with a handsome American soldier. In the background, a group of sullen, hollow-eyed German men observe them pass. Expression on their faces is not one of rage, but of profound existential defeat. They have lost the war. They have lost their city. Now they are observing the women of their nation, their last connection to a future, choose the enemy. The woman is not a betrayer. She is a realist. She has made the only rational choice available to her in an irrational reality. Her smile is not one of happiness, but of relief. She has secured a patron in the New World Order. The occurrence in Japan was even more complex and culturally earth-shattering. The Pan-Pan girls became a ubiquitous and tragic feature of the occupation. These were young Japanese women, often from respectable families, who had been utterly impoverished by the war, who solicited American GIs for money, food, or simple protection. The term itself is believed to be onomatopoetic, the sound of a hand slapping against another in a transaction. But to reduce this to simple prostitution is to miss the profound hypergamous strategy at play. For many of these women, the objective was not a single meal or a pair of stockings. The objective was a permanent pairing. The objective was to become a war bride. They were engaging in the most high-stakes audition of their lives, using the only currency they had left to attract the attention of a high-status provider. The most successful of them did not see themselves as prostitutes. They saw themselves as strategists, navigating the ruins of their old world to secure a place in the new one. They learned English. They adopted American customs. They offered not just intimacy, but the illusion of domesticity and companionship in a foreign and hostile land. For a lonely GI, this was a powerful attraction. The relationship between a Pan-Pan girl and her GI was a microcosm of the entire occupation, a transaction of power where resources and security were exchanged for companionship and a semblance of normalcy. The children born from these unions, the so-called occupation babies, are the living testament to this brutal period. In Germany, they were called Mischlingskinder, or more cruelly, Besetzungskinder, occupation children. Their lives were often incredibly difficult, caught between two worlds belonging to neither. They were living, breathing reminders of national humiliation and personal trauma. But their very existence is proof of the strategy's success. Their mothers, by securing a genetic link to the victor, ensured that their offspring would carry the passport of the winning tribe. This is hypergamy operating at its most fundamental genetic level. It is not about emotion. It is about the cold, hard calculus of genetic legacy and resource acquisition. The mother may have faced ostracism, but her child might have a chance at a life in America, the land of plenty, far from the hungry ghosts of Europe. This was a long-term investment in the face of absolute short-term catastrophe. The case of Japan offers one of the most stunning examples of this calculated choice. The story of Chiko, a young woman from a formerly aristocratic Tokyo family, is archetypal. Her family's home and wealth were vaporized in the fire bombings. Her father, a proud imperial officer, committed seppuku upon hearing the emperor's surrender speech, unable to live in a world where his entire belief system had collapsed. Chico, her mother, and her younger sister were left destitute, living in a shack and scavenging for food. The arrival of the Americans was initially met with terror, but terror soon gave way to a chilling pragmatism. Chico watched as other women in her neighborhood began to associate with GAs. They came back with food, medicine, and most importantly, a sense of security. One day, a young American officer lost, asked her for directions. She spoke a little English. He was polite, handsome, and clearly powerful. She made a choice in that moment that would have been unthinkable 2 years prior. She did not see the enemy. She saw a provider. She cultivated the relationship with the strategic precision of a general. She learned to make apple pie from care package ingredients. She listened to his stories. She offered him a refuge from the stress of occupation duty. Within a year, she was married to him and on her way to a new life in California. She left her past, her culture, and her mother, and
sister behind. Was this a betrayal, or was it the ultimate act of familial loyalty, removing herself as a mouth to feed and potentially creating a lifeline for her family later? This is the impossible moral calculus of crisis hypergamy. There is no right answer. There is only survival and the relentless drive to secure the best possible outcome for oneself and one's genetic line. This behavior is not a historical aberration. It is the default setting of human nature when the veneer of civilization is scraped away. The lessons for the modern man are not about blaming women for being pragmatic. The lesson is about understanding the true nature of the game. The harsh truth philosophy is, at its core, a radical acceptance of reality devoid of sentimentality. The war bride phenomenon is the ultimate harsh truth. It demonstrates with horrific clarity that a man's value is contingent and contextual. The same German soldier who was a hero in 1941 was a pariah in 1945. His inherent qualities had not changed. His courage, his loyalty, his love for his country, but his status had been utterly inverted. The American GI's inherent qualities were largely irrelevant. His status as a victor and a provider was everything. For the modern man, this translates to a simple, unforgiving truth. Your past deeds are irrelevant. Your promises are meaningless. Your inherent goodness is worthless. Your value is determined by your present ability to provide, protect, and project power and security in the here and now. The man who loses his job and falls into depression cannot appeal to the love he once shared with his partner. He is, in that moment, a defeated soldier returning to a homeland that has moved on. The man who fails to maintain his physical health, his mental fortitude, and his mission in life is a man inviting a silent slow motion. Dear John Letter, the world may not be in literal rubble around us, but the social and economic landscape is perpetually unstable. Crisis is always looming. A market crash, a personal illness, a social upheaval. In those moments, the same primal instincts that guided the war bride will surface. They are always there, simmering beneath the surface, waiting for the pressure to drop enough for them to burst forth. The illuminating, albeit dark conclusion from this entire saga is not one of despair, but of empowerment through clarity. The man who understands these forces is no longer a slave to a fairy tale. He is a strategist. He knows that his work is never done. His mission is eternal. He must forever be building, maintaining, and increasing his status, his resources, and his strength. He does this not for a woman, but for himself. His value is his own creation, his own fortress. A woman may share in that fortress, but she is not the reason for its construction. The war brides, from the English girls to the German Forgelines to the Japanese Pan-Pan girls, were not evil. They were rational actors in an irrational situation. They were playing the oldest game on earth with a ruthless efficiency that commands a certain grim respect. They teach us that in the theatre of human relations there is no room for audience members. There are only actors and those who are acted upon. The choice for a man is simple. Build an unassailable fortress of your own value. Become the victor in your own life and understand the dark primal currents that guide human choice, or risk becoming the man standing in the rubble, watching silently as the world moves on without you, a ghost of a forgotten war, wondering what he did wrong. The war is over, but the lessons are eternal.